Hello and welcome to my studio. In this video I'm going to show you how I made this picture. This was captured using only the available light from the candles, with fairy lights in the background for the out of focus effect. The amount of light from a candle is surprising, and exposure is not as long as you would think. In this video I'll show you exactly how I did it. Okay. So this is what I've got set up so far. So I've just put this wooden table on here, so it'll give me a nice surface that I can reflect the light from the candles in. And then for a background, I've just got this black flag. That'll just give me some contrast for the whole thing. The distance from the subject to the background is actually quite large, and I've done that on purpose so that I can really throw all the background out of focus. I'll come back to that in a bit. Okay, so for the subject then, I have some candles, and I'm basically just going to place these on the table like this. Now besides those ones, I also have another candle which I've put in a lab stand. I'm going to put that even further back, so that's way out of focus down here somewhere. Now the exact positions for all those are probably going to change as I set the shot up. So one thing that you will need for this, regardless of the type of camera that you use, is a tripod, because although the exposure is surprisingly short, it's still relatively long. So you will need a tripod just to make sure that your camera doesn't move during the exposure. Okay, so I've set that up at the front here. So the next thing would be the camera. So for the camera I'm using this medium format camera, which is tethered into Capture One software. So it's easy to follow along and see the results as I get them. Now I have a 120mm lens on the front of this, which is roughly the same angle of view that you would get from a 70mm lens on a full frame format camera. Okay, so I'm just going to place this on the tripod here. Right, so we'll set the shot up. Okay, so initially I'll just go for a rough focus, which I think should be about there. And I just want to change the position of some of the candles just so it looks a bit better. So I'm just going to move this one just over slightly like that. And I'll move this one just in a bit, like so. There we go. We'll just check that in the viewfinder again. Yeah, I think that looks okay. Okay, so the next thing to do would be just to turn the camera on, and we'll just have a look at the initial settings that we've got on the camera. There we are. So now on the software here, you can see the settings that I've got on the camera. So it's in full manual mode. At the moment I have a shutter speed of 125th of a second, ISO 100, and I've got the aperture set to f8. So that's about halfway through the range of the aperture for this particular lens. So to get the most effective out of focus effect, I'm probably going to need to change that aperture, but we'll see how we go. Alright, so with these settings, I'll just grab an image and we'll see what we get in terms of contamination from the house lights. And there we go. You can see from that we're getting a little bit of ghosting, but nothing too serious. But that's at those particular settings. And I'm going to be using the light from the candles to do the main illumination for this project. So let me just light one of those candles. And now with that illuminated, we'll grab that again and see what we get this time. Okay, so I'm getting a little bit of illumination from this, but nothing too spectacular. So in order to get a bit more effect from the candle, I'm going to lower the shutter speed quite considerably. Now this is a bit of a guess, but I'm just going to go for, what, 1/8 of a second? We'll try that. Okay, so at 1/8 of a second, you can see that with the house lights on, I've got quite a lot of contamination. I've probably got enough light coming out of the candle, but it's very hard to tell. So what I'm going to have to do is turn the house lights out. Okay, so with the house lights out, I'll grab another image. There. Now that's very much like the sort of thing that I want. So I've got a nice reflection of the candle in the table, and I'm getting enough illumination from that candle to actually light up the body of the wax. Okay, so with that now roughly set, I can set up the rest of the image here. So what I'm going to do is just light the other candles, and now we'll just have another go at grabbing those with the lights out. Okay. Yes, now that's starting to come together quite nicely. I think the amount of exposure that I've got is okay for the moment. Not too sure about just how out of focus these are, or even whether the candle in the front here is focused properly. So I'll just zoom in. We'll check the focus. Yes, I think the wick of that is quite nice. This is possibly a little bright. We'll see how we go. So with that set, the next thing to do would be to address the background. So this is what I'm going to use for my background. So this is just a piece of gauze, black gauze, and on this I've just put some fairy lights. Now the advantage of using a gauze like this is that you can actually hang the fairy lights from the gauze so that you can arrange them just the way you want. And being fairy lights, they're all point light sources. So when they go out of focus, they should give a large bokeh. We'll see how we go with that. Right, so I'll just put this in position. I'm going to try and get this as close to the back as I can. So probably somewhere around here. And with that, we'll just turn those on. There we are. So with those now illuminated, I'll just check in the viewfinder just to see if they're in anything like the right position. Yeah, that looks about right. Okay, so now with that done, next thing to do, turn the house lights out again, and we'll grab another image. Okay, so this is starting to come together now. So you can see that each one of those fairy lights has now caused this out of focus effect in the background. But each one of these is actually relatively small. Now the size of those is a function of not only the distance, but also the aperture that I'm using. So at the moment I'm using f8. So if I make that aperture considerably larger, so if I go from f8 to f4, which is the smallest aperture available on this particular lens, and then compensate for that by changing the shutter speed. So that's about 2 stops. So from an 1/8 of a second, that would be very roughly a 25th or a 30th. Let's go for a 30th. So with those new settings, I'll grab an image and we'll see what we get this time. And there we are. Instantly, we've got much larger out of focus beads in the background. And I like that effect. I think that's the sort of thing that I'm looking for. So it's gone from that to that. It's also worth looking at the color balance that I've got set at the moment. Now I normally capture everything in RAW, so the color balance doesn't really matter. You can always change it later. But it's good to use it at this stage so you can assess how the image is coming along. So on this particular software, what I can do is set a particular color balance. So if I just use the set tool here, and I'll just click on any one of these, like so, and now I can bring up the color balance feature and change this to whatever I feel. So I think I'm going to go for something quite warm. I just want to adjust the tint ever so slightly, just to give me something a bit more neutral. There we are. There. Okay, so with that set, I'll just check the focus once again now that I've changed the aperture. I can see that it's very slightly out. So what I'm going to do is just use live view. There we are. Just so I can set the focus point properly just on the candle in here. So I'll just zoom all the way into the center of the image. There we are. And just with the controls here, I can change the focus point. So there we go, that's going back onto the back side of the candle. You can see all this is now in focus, but the flame is out. So if I can come a little further forwards, there. So now this is precisely in focus. So with that adjusted, get rid of live view, and we'll just grab another image and see what we get now. There we are, that's the sort of thing I want, and I think that's looking very nice. Okay, so with that we've got a nice reflection of each candle in the table, and the background is looking quite nice. That's it for actually capturing the image. So what I'm going to do now is just go into Photoshop and do a little bit of post-production. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop, and I've loaded up the file of the image that I captured earlier. So the first thing to do is just to make a copy of this so I can edit the copy and leave the camera original alone. So the way I prefer to do that is just to go onto the layer here, right click the mouse, ask for a duplicate layer, and ask for a new document. And we'll just call this candles. There we go. So now Photoshop has made me a new document. I can now dispense with the camera original. I've always got that to go back to. So the next thing I want to do is just make a duplicate of this. So I'll just go back onto the layer again, right click, ask for a duplicate layer. This time I'm actually going to have a background copy, which is that. So this is my duplicate, and what I'm going to do with this is just soften the image ever so slightly. So I'm just going to use a filter for that. I'm going to use the camera raw filter, and in here I'm just going to change the clarity a little. So if you bring this up, it'll make everything very over sharp and over contrasty, but taking it back the other way has the exact opposite effect and makes it all a little dreamy, which is what I want. And also while I'm here, I'll just use the vignette tool just to add a vignette to the image overall. So we'll just take the corners down like so. Okay, with those two changes made, let's click on OK, and there we go. I put this on a separate layer so that I can add a layer mask to that. And now, if I want, I can take away that effect from various parts. Let me show you what I mean. So just make sure that black is selected as the foreground color. So wherever I paint on this mask in black will bring the underlying image through. So it's just the very center here that I want to stay sharp. So I'll just pick a paintbrush, that's possibly a little big. There we are. We'll just bring that back, like so. So if I just use this icon here, I can show you a before and after. That was before, and that's after. So I'll just expand that out a little, because this candle is the one that I really want to be sharp. There we are. So that's what it was before, this is what it is now. And that doesn't affect the rest of the image in the background. Okay, so finally I'll just apply a crop. Now I'm using this for video, so I'm using 16:9 as a specific ratio. So I'll just tighten it up ever so slightly, just move it a little bit in the frame. There. That's the sort of thing I want, I think. And there we have it. So mostly just by candlelight, I've been able to capture this image, and with a few techniques, I've added a bit of background interest as well. And by paying attention to aperture and color balance, I've ended up with an image which is rather nice, I think. Okay, well I hope you like watching how I made that image, and if you like watching these sort of things, do click on the other images as they appear, and don't forget to subscribe. Oh, and hit the like button. Thank you very much for watching.